Trust is perhaps one of the most powerful illusions we have built throughout our evolution as a species. We think of it as something solid, almost tangible, an invisible bridge between two human beings. But what do we really know about that bridge? Who can we truly trust in this increasingly complex world where human relationships are simultaneously more superficial and more intertwined than ever before? For thousands of years, our ancestors lived in small groups where trust was a matter of immediate survival. You had to know with absolute certainty that the hunter beside you wouldn't abandon you when a predator appeared. This trust was an evolutionary protection mechanism, essential and necessary, but now we live in a radically different world, where threats and alliances take on much subtler and more complex forms. Technology has completely transformed our capacity to trust and to be trustworthy. We no longer trust only people, but systems, algorithms, and entire networks of interconnected humans and machines. Have you ever wondered why we feel that almost painful need to trust someone? That deep sense that we need at least one person in the world who completely understands who we are, who stands by us unconditionally? That desire isn't accidental. It's the echo of our evolution as a social species, when isolation meant certain death. But the world has changed drastically, and our evolutionary instincts are not always aligned with the realities of modern life. Today, trust has become simultaneously more necessary and more dangerous than it has ever been. Let's examine the origins of this contradiction. For most of human history, we lived in groups of 50 to 150 people. We knew every member of our tribe intimately, their facial expressions, habits, strengths, and weaknesses. Trust was based on direct, constant observation, reinforced by blood ties and decades of shared experience. In hunter-gatherer societies, betraying the group's trust often resulted in exile, practically a death sentence. In that context, it was relatively safe to trust your immediate circle. Evolution equipped us with sophisticated neurological mechanisms to detect lies and assess reliability. Our brains have circuits dedicated to recognizing micro-expressions and subtle inconsistencies in others' behavior. But these mechanisms were designed for a world very different from the one we live in today. In the information age, our evolutionary tools for assessing trust face unprecedented challenges. We regularly interact with thousands of people we will never meet in person. We trust companies, governments, and systems made up of millions of anonymous individuals. Our ability to assess who deserves trust is overloaded beyond the limits it was designed for. And so we come to a disturbing conclusion. There are entire categories of people whom our natural tendency is to trust, but who often don't deserve that trust. Not because they're inherently malevolent, but because the incentives, structures, and realities of the modern world create conditions where implicit trust becomes dangerous. Who are these people we shouldn't trust blindly, even when all our instincts and social conditioning tell us otherwise? Before identifying them, it's important to understand that this isn't a call for universal paranoia. I'm not advocating for a world where we suspect every smile, every offer of help, every extended hand. That would be not only psychologically destructive, but also evolutionarily counterproductive. Cooperation based on trust is what allowed us to build civilizations. But we must recognize that our programming to trust doesn't always serve our best interests in the radically transformed environment we've created. The first category of people we must question are those whose incentives are fundamentally misaligned with our interests, even when they are members of our own family. Consider the financial advisor who also happens to be your cousin. He may genuinely care about you and your family. He may sit at your dinner table during holidays and share childhood stories. But if he earns commissions from the financial products he sells, his incentives are not fully aligned with your best interests. Not because he's ill-intentioned, but because the economic systems we operate in create these inherent contradictions. The structure of the modern financial system makes it nearly impossible for him to offer completely impartial advice, even with the best intentions. He is trapped in a system that rewards certain recommendations over others, regardless of what would actually be best for you. This is a new reality our hunter-gatherer ancestors never had to face. They never had to consider how an invisible incentive system could influence the behavior of tribe members. When a clan member offered advice about where to hunt, that advice was based purely on the shared success of the hunt. Today, invisible structures of incentives permeate all our social interactions in ways we rarely fully understand. The second category is even more complicated. Those who sincerely believe they are acting in our best interest, but whose fundamental beliefs about what constitutes best interest diverge deeply from ours. Think of well-meaning parents who pressure their children to pursue careers they themselves value, but that may not align with their children's passions or talents. They are not trying to cause harm. In fact, they're convinced they're protecting their children from future suffering. But their definition of what makes a good or successful life may be fundamentally incompatible with their child's. Implicit trust in their judgment can lead to years of unhappiness, distorted life choices, and wasted potential. This problem has always existed to some extent. Even in hunter-gatherer societies, there was tension between individual needs and group expectations. But the complexity and diversity of the modern world have dramatically widened that gap. Today, the possibilities for living a meaningful life are so vast and varied that one generation's assumptions about what constitutes a good life can be radically different from the next. And yet, we instinctively trust those closest to us to guide us through these monumental decisions, often without critically examining whether their mental models of the world are still relevant to the realities we face. The third category we must approach with caution are those who operate with significantly outdated or incomplete information, even when they have the best intentions. Consider the family doctor you've known for decades. You trust him implicitly, but if he doesn't stay up to date with the latest medical research, if he isn't familiar with the newest treatments, your trust may be misplaced. Not because he wishes you harm, but because human knowledge is expanding at a rate that makes it impossible for any individual to stay completely current, even within their own specialty. This is an entirely new vulnerability in human history. For tens of thousands of years, the body of knowledge necessary for survival changed relatively little from generation to generation. An elder's advice on how to hunt, find medicinal plants, or build shelter remained valid for centuries. Today, medical knowledge doubles approximately every 73 days. Studies that inform best practices in virtually every field are constantly being updated, revised, and sometimes completely overturned. In this environment, trust based on familiarity or past experience can be dangerously outdated. The fourth category includes those who are themselves victims of belief systems or institutions that distort their judgment, even if they are personally virtuous. Consider the pastor or religious leader you've known since childhood. He may be genuinely devoted to your well-being and deeply committed to his principles. But if he operates within a belief system that prioritizes certain values or behaviors over your psychological well-being or personal autonomy, his guidance can be harmful regardless of his intentions. He is not hypocritical or malicious. He truly believes he's offering you the most valuable advice possible. But he's trapped within a framework of thought that may, in some cases, value conformity over individual well-being. This, too, is something our ancestors rarely faced on such a scale. In the small, homogeneous communities of the past, beliefs and values were generally shared across the entire group. There was no need to navigate radically different value systems or consider how institutional biases could distort the advice one received. Today, we are constantly crossing boundaries between different value systems, often without realizing it. The fifth category includes those who simply lack the capacity to be trustworthy in the specific area where we are placing our trust, regardless of their personal qualities. Consider the longtime friend who offers business advice despite never having run a company, or the brother who gives relationship advice despite his own record of dysfunctional partnerships. They may genuinely want to help. They may even sincerely believe they have valuable insights to offer. But without relevant experience or expertise, their guidance is more likely to be harmful than helpful, no matter how good their intentions. Again, this is a relatively new complexity. In smaller, simpler societies, it was much easier to assess someone's competence. You could directly see whether a hunter consistently brought back food, or whether a shelter builder constructed huts that stayed standing through storms. Today, we assess competence in fields so specialized and esoteric that it's almost impossible for a layperson to distinguish between advice that is sound and advice that only sounds plausible but is fundamentally wrong. The sixth and final category we must question are those who may not be fully aware of their own biases, prejudices, and blind spots, even while sincerely trying to help us. Consider a mentor who built his career in an era with very different power dynamics and social expectations. He may genuinely want to guide you towards success, but his understanding of what constitutes appropriate behavior or effective strategies may be fundamentally misaligned with today's realities. Not because he's deliberately outdated, but because we are all deeply shaped by our formative experiences, often in ways we don't fully realize. This challenge has always existed to some degree, but the acceleration of social and technological change has made it far more pronounced. Our grandparents grew up in a world where certain assumptions about race, gender, sexuality, and ability were rarely questioned. They may have internalized perspectives that we now recognize as harmful, not out of malice, but simply as a product of their time and environment. Their guidance may inadvertently perpetuate systems of inequality or exclusion that they themselves do not fully recognize. I need to pause for a moment and ask you directly, which aspect of this discussion about trust resonates most with your own experiences? Have you ever found yourself trusting someone close to you, only to later realize that despite their best intentions, the trust may have been misplaced? I know that we often keep such realizations to ourselves, perhaps out of fear of appearing ungrateful or cynical in a world that celebrates unconditional trust as a virtue. But your experiences are valid and probably shared by more people than you imagine. Share in the comments. I learned to question trust when. Your honesty can help create a space where we can discuss these complexities more openly instead of pretending that trust is always simple and unequivocal. And perhaps by sharing these experiences, we can develop a more nuanced and adaptive approach to deciding whom to trust and under what circumstances. Now, let us explore the broader implications of these considerations. What does it mean to live in a world where implicit trust is no longer adaptive? How do we navigate the complexities of human relationships when the very systems that structure those relationships often create incentives for betrayal, even if subtle or unintentional? First, we must recognize that this is not an argument for universal cynicism. Trusting selectively and strategically is not the same as not trusting. In fact, research consistently shows that societies with high levels of social trust perform better across almost every indicator, from economic prosperity to self-reported happiness. The goal is not to eliminate trust, but to refine it, to make it more robust and adapted to the complexities of the modern world. A crucial step is to separate trust in people from trust in systems, incentives, and circumstances. We can fully trust someone's moral character while simultaneously recognizing that the systems in which they operate may compromise their ability to act according to their best intentions. This distinction is essential for maintaining healthy relationships while protecting ourselves from unintended harm. Consider how this perspective changes family dynamics. Instead of assuming that a close relative will always give the best advice simply because they share your genetic code and genuine affection, we can separately evaluate their knowledge, experience, and the incentive structures in which they operate. This does not mean treating family members with suspicion. It means recognizing that genuine love does not automatically grant expertise in every area, nor does it override systemic pressures that may distort judgment. This approach also has profound implications for how we educate the next generation. Traditionally, we have taught children to trust certain authority figures implicitly: parents, teachers, police officers, doctors. But perhaps a more sophisticated approach is needed in an increasingly complex world. What if, instead of teaching categorical trust, we taught discernment? What if we equipped children with tools to evaluate whom to trust, when, and in which specific domains? This does not mean raising a generation of cynics, but rather a generation of critical thinkers capable of navigating a world where misplaced trust can have significant consequences. It means teaching them to differentiate between a person's moral character and their competence in specific areas. It means helping them understand how systems and incentives shape behavior, sometimes even overriding the best of intentions. There are also fascinating implications for the development of emerging technologies, particularly artificial intelligence and automated systems. As we increasingly delegate decisions to algorithms, whom are we really trusting? The programmers who wrote the original code? The companies that own and operate the systems? The statistical models and databases that inform the decisions? Trust in this context becomes even more diffuse and complicated. Perhaps the most important lesson is that trust in the 21st century must be dynamic and contextual, not static and categorical. We need to recognize that someone can be highly trustworthy in one domain and simultaneously unreliable in another. That even the most moral people can have blind spots, biases, and vulnerabilities to systemic pressures. That trust is not a binary trait permanently assigned to a person, but a continuous evaluation that evolves with circumstances, knowledge, and experience. This more nuanced view of trust has implications for how we structure institutions and societies. Rather than relying primarily on personal integrity, though that remains important, perhaps we should design systems that are robust even when individuals within them are subject to flaws, biases, and distorted incentives. This means transparency, accountability, and meaningful checks and balances at every level. There is a deep human tendency to seek simple solutions to complex problems. We want to divide the world into trustworthy and untrustworthy people and then live our lives according to that categorization. But reality is far more intricate. The same person who would sacrifice their life for you in an emergency might inadvertently give you disastrous financial advice. The doctor who has accurately diagnosed and treated dozens of your illnesses might be dangerously misinformed about a new treatment that could save your life. The spiritual leader who brought comfort and meaning to generations of your family might be promoting views that limit your growth and potential. Recognizing these complexities is not defeatism or cynicism. It is a form of adaptive maturity that allows us to navigate a world where trust remains vital, but where old heuristics for deciding whom to trust are no longer sufficient. It is a way of honoring the ongoing evolution of our cognitive and social capacities, acknowledging that just as our ancestors developed new instincts and intuitions to face the challenges of their time, we too must develop new frameworks for the challenges of ours. And there is something profoundly liberating in this perspective. When we abandon the notion that we must trust certain categories of people unconditionally simply because of their roles or relationships to us, we make space for a more authentic and honest kind of connection. Paradoxically, recognizing the limits of trust can enable deeper and truer relationships, ones based on a clear understanding of each other's capabilities, limitations, and circumstances. Consider how this perspective could transform relationships between parents and children. Instead of assuming unquestionable authority based on the parental role, parents could model for their children how to recognize and admit the limits of their own knowledge and perspectives. They could demonstrate that unconditional love does not require unconditional trust, that in fact, sometimes the deepest love manifests in the humility to say, I'm not sure, or that's not my area of expertise, or even the system I'm part of might be compromising my ability to advise you objectively on this matter. This honesty does not weaken parental authority, it strengthens it, transforming it from something externally imposed into something granted in recognition of authenticity and integrity. It allows children to see their parents not as infallible oracles, but as human beings navigating their own complexities and limitations, doing the best they can in a confusing world. Likewise, consider how this perspective could transform our relationship with social institutions. Instead of trusting educational, financial, medical, or legal systems implicitly simply because they have existed for a long time, or because authority figures endorse them, we could develop a more mature relationship with these institutions. We could recognize their value and utility in specific domains while remaining alert to distorted incentives, systemic biases, and inherent limitations that might compromise their reliability in others. At a broader societal level, this more nuanced perspective on trust could strengthen democracy and civic institutions. Effective democracy does not require blind trust in leaders or systems, but rather constant and informed vigilance. It requires citizens who can discern when trust is warranted and when skepticism is appropriate, when institutions are serving the common good, and when they have been captured by special interests or distorted by misaligned incentives. As we move into an increasingly complex and interconnected future, the question of trust will become even more important. Artificial intelligence, biotechnology, social networks, and virtual reality are all fundamentally transforming how we relate to one another and to our institutions. These developments create new vulnerabilities and new forms of exploitation, but also new possibilities for authentic connection and meaningful collaboration. Perhaps the central challenge of our time is reconciling our deep evolutionary need to trust with the realities of a world where unconditional trust rarely serves our best interests. We need to develop a new grammar of trust, one that recognizes its contingent and contextual nature, that differentiates between trust in moral character and trust in competence, and that understands how systems shape behavior independently of individual intentions. If these reflections have touched on something you've been feeling but perhaps lacked the words to express, know that you are not alone. By subscribing to the channel, you'll connect with a growing community of people who share your concerns and your desire for a deeper understanding of the philosophical challenges of our time. Each week, we gather here to explore together the big questions that define our era and to seek not only understanding, but also wiser ways of living amid the transformations we are witnessing. This is not just a channel, but a space for dialogue and collective growth. Join us on this ongoing journey. Subscribe so we can continue this essential conversation about how to live with greater wisdom and purpose in a world that often leaves us disoriented and divided. Ultimately, the question is not whether we should trust, but how we should trust. It's not about abandoning trust altogether, which would not only be impossible given our evolutionary design, but deeply impoverishing to the human experience. It's about developing a form of trust adapted to the realities of the 21st century, one that allows us to form meaningful connections and cooperate effectively while protecting us from the vulnerabilities inherent in unconditional or misplaced trust. Perhaps the deepest wisdom comes from an apparently paradoxical perspective that the truest and most enduring trust arises when we openly acknowledge its limits. When we admit that even those closest to us, those we most love, and who love us most, have limitations in their ability to advise, guide, or protect us. When we understand that this does not diminish the value of those relationships, but in fact deepens it, transforming them from idealized fantasies into authentic connections between real human beings, each with their own strengths, weaknesses, blind spots, and capacities. As we move together into an uncertain future, perhaps this is the most important kind of trust we can cultivate. Not blind trust in individuals or institutions, but trust in our collective ability to navigate the complexities of the human condition with wisdom, humility, and an ever-deepening understanding of what it means to trust and to be worthy of trust in the extraordinary world we have created.
Why is it that after thousands of years of history, of developing, sophisticated networks of information and communication, our information is not getting any better? I mean, at the present moment, you can say that humans have the best, the most sophisticated information technology in history, and we are losing the ability to even talk with each other and to listen and to hold a reasonable conversation.
A lot of people, if they're watching this video, it was recommended to them by an algorithm.
Algorithms now are extremely powerful. They increasingly control us. I'm now publishing a book. I'm on a book tour. My number one client is not a human being, it's the algorithm. If I can get the algorithm to recommend my book, that's it. My job is done. The humans will follow the algorithm. We need these algorithms, otherwise we can't manage these huge information network without algorithmic help. They should be accountable. If a social media algorithm recommends to people a hate-filled conspiracy theory, this is the fault not of the person who produced the conspiracy theory. It's the fault of the people who designed and let loose the algorithm. There is this huge debate about freedom of speech. I think we should be extremely careful about censoring the free speech of human beings, but they should be held accountable for the decisions of their algorithms. And algorithms don't have freedom of speech. It's the first time in history that there is something which is not a human being that decides which stories to spread and that can create new stories.
I think about climate change. One of the things that people should realize is what is the cost of preventing catastrophic climate change? What size of a check do you need to write if you want to solve this? How much money? And nobody knows for sure, but the best estimates we have, something like 2%, 3%, maybe 5% of global GDP. Now, this is a lot, but it's completely doable. If I told you it's 50%, then forget it. We are not going to do it. It's not like if you're a dinosaur 65 million years ago, when the asteroid comes, then don't bother. I mean, there is nothing you can do about it. But we are not like the dinosaurs. To shift even 5% of our resources from one field to another, this is what politicians do all the time.